Hello, everybody. Welcome to Monday Night Live. My name's Derek Arden. Our program has crossed the world from Hawaii to South Africa to Texas. And our subjects have all been inspirational success and leadership. But I've got on two people that have crossed the world almost on a push bike tonight. Two young people with determination, motivation, and their own style of leadership. I'm delighted to welcome them to Monday Night Live. Tom and Julia, thanks for joining us. And please share your screen, and we look forward to your fantastic presentation.
Thanks for that wonderful introduction, Derek. Hi, everyone. We're really excited to be here today to talk you through our one-year adventure pedaling across the world.
So here you've got a quick overview of our route. So we set off from the bottom right there down in Singapore before pedaling our way initially north up through Malaysia, across Thailand, Cambodia, and up to the capital of Vietnam in Hanoi. From there, we nipped across to India, avoiding the Myanmar civil war, before again heading down to the south of India and then all the way back up to Delhi. After that, it was on up to the Central Asian republics of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. And from there, we zipped crossed the Caspian Sea, which was closed at the time of crossing, to Georgia, to the capital, Tbilisi, before crossing all the way across Turkey, ferry to Greece, to Athens, up through the Balkans, and then across Europe to home in London.
So this journey saw us cross 26 countries and pedal over 19,000 kilometres. So what did it look like before we embarked on this huge adventure? Well, to start with, we had originally planned to do this trip on a tandem bicycle, which Tom bought for me for Christmas one year. But very quickly after doing some trips around town, I realised staring at his back wasn't very fun, so swapped it for two individual bicycles. And a huge part of the trip was selling off some of our flock of bicycles. As you can see in the bottom left photo, we had a whopping 11 bikes between us. So that was a big part of selling all of our gear. We also did a lot of planning, which involved scouting out what we wanted to do for the trip, which we decided would be to cycle back from the furthest point on mainland Asia connected by land, which is why we chose Singapore. So within this planning, we gathered bicycle boxes from our local cycle store to package the bikes in before flying. We moved out of our flat and moved all of our stuff into our parents' old house, which is where it's stored. And that saw us ready to set off to Singapore.
So here you can see us on a very cold, dreary November night, I believe that was, rather than early morning. Both boxes packaged up in the cardboard, which of course can just go in the recycling when you get to the other end. And then you can see our luggage there on the trolley on the left. So this is our route through Central Asia. So we arrived in Singapore and then we took the west coast of Malaysia up into Thailand before crossing over across Thailand, the plains of Cambodia, into the highlands of Vietnam before we dropped down to the coast near Da Nang and then carried on north to Hanoi. And really the weather when we arrived in Singapore couldn't have been different. You can see us there in our shorts and t-shirts. It went from a dreary November evening in the UK to hot, balmy and humid Singapore. We spent a couple of days in Singapore finding our feet, putting the bikes back together and getting over the jet lag before we crossed the causeway over into Malaysia and began the incredible journey. The first couple of weeks were really a bit of a honeymoon phase for us. Everything was new, everything was exciting. We were still working everything out as we went along. But the people of Malaysia couldn't have been kinder and friendlier. We had a really great time, especially in those first few weeks.
And the honeymoon continued on into Thailand, where we just experienced incredible beaches, Buddhist temples, and really amazing cycling with friendly locals. One of the standouts in Thailand was we spent a lot of time camping at Buddhist temples, or wats, where we were able to pitch our tent in the corner under a covering and sleep for the night free of charge. And it really gave us a large insight into how prevalent Buddhism is within the country, and just the values of the religion and kindness that we experienced because of that.
And Julia, you were welcomed into the Buddhist temple to pitch your tent in the corner of the holy place.
Yeah, absolutely. There was often a little covered area where a monk would show us where we could pitch our tent. But sometimes we were even given a little hut completely for free, and monks would bring us food and gifts, and it was just completely unexpected and really made us feel welcome. And these temples were always overrun with animals. There was peacocks and dogs and cats everywhere. So it was a very loud place to sleep, as they did not go to bed at night. But it was really an amazing experience each time.
Fantastic. Thank you.
In Thailand as well, we also navigated cycling in and out of Bangkok, which was definitely a character building experience. We survived it just about, with all 9 lives intact, but it was definitely hectic. Then we moved on to Cambodia, where we had the amazing opportunity to teach at some English schools. So we were staying at a guest lodge overnight, and the owner happened to own the English school, which was next door. So he invited us in, and we unexpectedly taught a lesson. You can see the photo of us with some of the students on the right-hand side. And it was really just nice to have a conversation with these students, as they were so intrigued and really just honoured to be able to speak English to us. We also spent time at some Buddhist temples, again camping in the corner. You can see down the bottom left photo our tent in the corner of inside a building, this time of a Buddhist temple. And next to us at night time, the room was full of monks just sleeping on the floor. They had just simple mosquito nets around them to shield themselves, whereas we just pitched the inner of our tent to also shield ourselves from the rabid mosquitoes. Very quickly, at this point, our feet tan lines were developing, as we were wearing sandals 24/7, and we've got some pretty interesting tan lines on our feet. Within Cambodia as well, me and myself and Tom are both vegan, and we found it quite a challenge to stay vegan whilst in Cambodia. It was definitely the hardest country. We found that communicating with people was sometimes a bit difficult, as a lot of people can't read or write. So Google Translate was almost out of the window. And so it was difficult, but we managed to work around it, and mostly we would cook for ourselves using our stove in the evening. And then onto Vietnam, which was a huge cultural shift from Cambodia. The people were really friendly, and there was luxurious jungle which we cycled through in the highlands. We made use of a platform called Warm Showers in Vietnam, which is a platform where cyclists can host fellow cyclists and offer them a place to sleep and a meal to eat, and welcome them into their home. And one of our Warm Showers hosts happened to own an English school as well. So we, for a bed and board, we did a bit of English teaching. And we also got invited to his sister-in-law's wedding, which was a lot of fun. So that was a huge experience. We've realised that the Vietnamese love karaoke, and about 90% of the wedding was just karaoke at deafening volume. But luckily we managed to save our eardrums and leave Vietnam without permanent hearing damage.
And Julie, you borrowed that dress, did you, for the wedding, or did you carry that on your bike?
Yeah, this was a borrowed dress from some Vietnamese ladies. Funnily enough, it took a long time to find a dress that fit me, because Vietnamese ladies are very petite. So eventually I managed to drag one out from the back of the wardrobe.
And Tom, where did you get that gear from?
So that was just my normal riding gear. And those are actually Julia's trousers, which were the smartest things we had on us.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you.
So after Vietnam, when we arrived in Hanoi, we flew across to India. We flew into Kolkata, which is in the northeast, up by Bengal. And from there, we spent a few weeks in Kolkata volunteering with my uncle before catching a 27-hour train down to Chennai on the west coast there. And we cycled down into Kerala, which were the kind of old tea plantations and hill stations of the colonial era, before heading north along the west coast and eventually arriving in Delhi. So India was by far the most colourful place we visited, and actually, to answer Carl's question in the chat, by far the best food. Every state in India is like a new country with a new language and a completely different cuisine. Coconut based down in the south, moving on to kind of heavier, richer curries in the north. But it was incredible. Cows everywhere you go, in the cities, in the jungles. I think you're never more than a few meters from a cow in India. But really the standout thing was just the kindness of the people there. Luckily, the kind of one of the common languages alongside Hindi is English, so communication was really easy and we didn't really have too much of a problem there. So it was great being able to connect with locals as we explored India. We actually made the news in India. We were stopped by a reporter on one of our many selfie stops. So maybe 4 or 5 times a day at least, we'd be stopped by normally men on motorbikes asking for selfies and photos. And one just happened to be a reporter. And there you can see in the middle, it was the largest Tamil language newspaper. And Julia pretending to hold up a copy. That's not actually the right newspaper. While we were in India, particularly as we got towards the north, towards Delhi, this was around May, we encountered a record-breaking heat wave. So when we were cycling, the temperatures were regularly hitting 45 degrees plus, that's centigrade. And really an absolute lifesaver in those conditions was the water machines that you'd find along the side of the road. So some would be free, others would be maybe a few rupees. 1 rupee is roughly the equivalent of a British pence. So really quite cheap and saves probably hundreds of plastic bottles when you're thirsty. If we couldn't find these water machines, we also carried a little UV sterilizer so we could sterilize tap water, which again was an absolute lifesaver.
So next up after India was a big shift. We flew from Delhi to Almaty in Kazakhstan. And we left Delhi with temperatures of 50 degrees and arrived in Kazakhstan to a nice cool, just 8 degrees. And the immediate thing we noticed was the fresh air. Delhi was incredibly polluted when we were there. So that shift to the mountains and the gorgeous scenery was very welcomed. And quickly after Kazakhstan, we entered Kyrgyzstan, which was our favorite country of the trip. It was absolutely stunning, gorgeous scenery, incredible cycling, but very challenging. Roads were almost non-existent. It was just bumpy tracks. So our gear and ourselves were given a good shaken on every section of the trip. Wild horses would roam freely, which is really quite spectacular to see, as in the West, we see them as pets almost. And the beautiful greens were just jaw-dropping. But in Kyrgyzstan, we also faced some of our most challenging riding. We spent a day riding over 1,500 meters up a mountain pass where we camped over 3,500 meters at night. As you can see in the top left, we pitched our tent under the snow-covered mountains, ready to ride the next morning. And the next morning, we woke up to a tent covered in snow. And we slept in every single piece of clothing we owned, as you can see on the bottom left, and huddled for warmth. But just 8 minutes into riding the next day, unfortunately, we had a huge mechanical. My rear derailleur, which is what changes the gears on the bike, completely snapped and mushed into my wheel, and there was no saving it. So Tom very kindly took the broken derailleur and we descended down the other side of the mountain, as there was no way that we could continue the 3-day cycle to the other side, which was completely isolated. So once we descended down to the mountain and regained our bearings, we figured out a plan to fix the bicycles. And after gaining some signal and speaking to locals, we found out that the nearest bike shop was only 300 kilometers away. So Tom very heroically did a 300-kilometer cycle with one gear over many mountain areas. So that was definitely a test of resilience and strong going.
And was that what the road was like for those 300 kilometers? You know, that sort of stony track.
So the 300 kilometers itself was a little bit better. You can see it behind me on that bottom right. So that was nice tarmac. The top right there is what the conditions would have been if we'd continued over the mountain pass. But luckily we hadn't summited yet. So it was just, you know, a straight line zip down the mountain back to the tarmac road.
Wow. Okay. Thanks.
Very lucky.
So after Kyrgyzstan was probably the toughest segment of the trip, the Pamir Highway, which is the second highest international highway in the world. It runs from Osh, which is the kind of summer capital of Kyrgyzstan, right on the border with Uzbekistan, all the way to the capital of Tajikistan, Dushanbe. So it was built by the Soviets to supply their invasion of Afghanistan, and not a lot of maintenance has been done to it since. But Tajikistan itself was incredibly beautiful, incredibly rugged. Often it felt like we were cycling on Mars or the moon. We'd go perhaps 4 or 5 days at a time between settlements where you'd see people. Often those settlements would just be a few houses, maybe a well. You'd be lucky if they were connected to the grid or had any signal at all. But it was some of the most beautiful cycling we've seen. We spent about 3 weeks above 3,000 meters. So Julia did encounter a bit of altitude sickness at first for the first few days. So we did need to slow down a little bit and slow down our ascent. But luckily it is something you can adapt to if you're just a little bit cautious. Yeah.
So then moving on to Georgia, Turkey, the Balkans, and a last stint across Europe.
So why did you fly that bit? Because it's impossible to cycle that bit or too dangerous?
So a combination. So the initial plan was to cycle from Kyrgyzstan across Uzbekistan, so across the desert. And then there's a ferry that crosses the Caspian Sea to Azerbaijan. Unfortunately, Azerbaijan have shut their borders since COVID, so you can only fly to Azerbaijan. So that was impossible. So the only other options we had were to go through Russia or through Iran. And of course, particularly as British citizens, neither of those are particularly good ideas at the moment.
I don't think we'd have seen you again if you'd have done that.
Possibly not.
We also had a little bit of a time deadline, as Tom had a 1-year sabbatical from work. So fitting this trip into 1 year was really important. And we definitely pedaled as fast as we could for most of it. So yeah, this is the last stint across Europe. And we started off in Turkey, which was such a vibrant country. The kindness was immediate. When we would cycle down the road, people would welcome us and call us over for chai, for tea. And if we accepted every request for tea, we wouldn't have got anywhere because it was just hundreds every day. The Muslim prevalence in Turkey was really quite there. As a woman, it was a country I was quite nervous for, as I'd heard from other cyclists that they'd had some issues in Turkey. But myself, I had none whatsoever. I just experienced kindness. I think being with Tom, being with a male, makes a massive difference in these countries. And it was the same with India as well. I experienced no negativity being a woman. Although with my short hair, I very often did get confused for a man on the daily basis. So that was less of a problem. In Turkey as well, something we experienced was the amazing fruit. The peaches, the melons, the plums were just so fragrant. And we really had some incredible wild camping spots throughout Turkey. We did try to stay through the centre of the country, as when we reached Turkey, it was August. So by the sea, it was reaching 40 degrees. So we really tried to stay above 2,000 meters most of the time to keep the temperature down.
So after Turkey, we caught the ferry to Athens, and then it was on up the Balkans for us. So we paddled along the Greek coast and actually met my parents in Corfu for a short holiday before crossing to Albania and then onwards and upwards. The vibrancy and the welcome of the Balkans is legendary. They've had their problems in the past, but the people themselves are just incredibly kind and just generous. We were there in plum season, which was a great coincidence. So not a day would go by where we wouldn't just encounter plum trees on the side of the road and stuff ourselves until we were nearly sick. And of course, with plum season also comes rakia season, their local delicacy. So you can see us there, bottom right. We were just cycling along when we encountered these two gentlemen with their still out in the garden, distilling their own rakia. It was also pepper season, which is another bonus. But really, the Balkans was the first time when we knew that the time limit was coming to an end, particularly as the weather started to change. It was getting into September, the autumn. So we had some really wet, soggy days, really sort of made us miss the sunshine of Turkey and Central Asia.
And then the last stint across Europe. So throughout this section, it really hit home that it was autumn. It was October, so the days were getting shorter, the light was going, and the rain and cold were hitting in. So we had some quite soggy and cold days, and we really pushed fast across Europe. We cycled thousands of kilometres in just a month to make it back to the UK for the end of October. But across Europe, we almost had an expectation that the kindness that we experienced would die down a little bit with sort of the reserved way of us in the West. But we found by using platforms like warm showers and couch surfing, we were able to stay with hosts every night throughout Europe. Every single night we had a different host lined up where we would stay completely for free in their house. They'd give us a shower, a meal, and be welcomed into their family and find out about life in their country, which was really amazing. Because damn, hotels are expensive in Europe.
Wow.
And it was amazing to connect with other cyclists who'd done similar journeys like this, or just people on couch surfing who wanted to welcome travel into their home because they themselves weren't able to travel. So we were able to exchange a meal for all of our stories, which people really enjoyed. So it was we spent most of Europe cycling along the Danube, which was equally stunning with castles all along the way, which finally led us to...
So then we were nearly home. So we caught the ferry from Holland across to Harwich. It was then 1 day's ride into London and then a day's ride the other side out to our home in Surrey. We were very lucky, particularly being October, that we had 2 really glorious blue sky days. Although our ride into London was probably the hairiest we'd had of the entire trip. And that's comparing it to 600 kilometers along the Afghan border. I think part of the big problem was the change in infrastructure from the Netherlands, which are obviously renowned for their incredible bike lanes and whatnot, whereas the outskirts of London is perhaps less cycle friendly. But we were nearly home, which was the main thing. And here you can see the moment we arrived home. We had just expected a low-key affair when we arrived, but my mum had other ideas and the entire family had turned up to see us. There you can see Julia's mum running alongside, absolutely ecstatic. And you can also catch a glimpse of the sort of bike setup we had. So 2 panniers at the front, 2 at the back. Each bike weighed about 45, 50 kilos without food or water. So maybe another 5 or 10 kilos on top of that when fully loaded in sort of expedition mode. We had a lovely evening meeting all the family and friends, going to the pub, having the first proper British pint. And then it was lasagna, a meal we had sorely missed, having lived without an oven for over a year. And of course, cutting the ribbon.
We also placed the dot on the last map. Before we set off, I designed a map of our trip, which I printed out for all our family and friends, and they were placing dots along the route to track our progress as we went.
I love the cakes.
Yeah.
They were made by Bridget, who I think is on the call with us at the moment.
Yeah, Bridget's here. Brilliant. Wow.
So the final stats for the trip. We cycled a whopping 19,159 kilometres, with 125,000 meters of elevation, which is the equivalent of Everest from sea level to summit 14 times.
So we were cycling for over 1,100 hours across 26 countries. We actually kept a spreadsheet of every single transaction we made.
That was you, Tom.
Was my baby. So every banana, every inner tube, every hotel, and it came out to just under £12,000 for the year for both of us. So by far cheaper than staying at home. So if you're looking for a way to save some money, get on a bike. We also tracked all of our mechanicals. So we only had 18 punctures throughout the trip, again, for both of us. So I think that's pretty good going. 15 gear cables and a few other bits and bobs.
Wow.
So that rounds up our presentation. Thank you very much for coming, everyone. If you want to see any more of our photos, you can follow us on Instagram. We're named @pedalingbikes. And on LinkedIn, we're Tom Page or Julia Saunders. And I myself, I'm a graphic designer and do motion design as well. So if you want to view some of my work or to work with me, I'm at juliasaunders.co.uk, where you can view my website. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Thanks, Julia and Tom. That was a superb presentation, and congratulations on that ride. That's pretty amazing. Well, it's not pretty amazing. It's absolutely fantastic. Brilliant. So well done. Can if you'd like to turn the screen sharing off now, so I can get everybody onto gallery view, and I'd like to ask members of Monday Night Live to give Julia and Tom the vote of thanks in the normal way. Brilliant. Absolutely fantastic. Well done, and thank you so much. And as Julia and Tom said, there's the Julia's website. And Tom, I think you should become an accountant, mate, actually, if you're doing spreadsheets every minute of the day for what's going on. Absolutely brilliant. Will you stay on and answer a few questions after I've turned the recording off, please?
Yeah, of course.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you so much.